Hello everyone and welcome. Today I want to talk about what I think is inarguably the worst part of Darkest Dungeon 2, and that part is the relationship system. But we all know that the relationship system in Darkest Dungeon 2 is not good, so instead what I would like to do is present a potential solution. What's more, I want this solution to be tied inexorably to already existing game mechanics and systems. To do otherwise, I think would require too much development time than what this is worth. The majority of the game's systems are already designed. Reworking the entire game around a brand new relationship system, I think is both unneeded and unviable. But really quickly before we begin, I would just like to remind everybody that liking the video and subscribing are both greatly appreciated. They show me that you like my content, and they show YouTube that they should show my content to more people. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Before I jump into what I would do to rework and fix the relationship system, I want to specifically denote what I think points of frustration are with that relationship system. Firstly, the in-combat barks take away agency from the player and take far too long to complete. It's not satisfying to have to interrupt gameplay to watch one of your characters spout the same line over and over again. I'm sure we're all tired of seeing, "My dear, my love," over and over again when your characters are amorous. Secondly, the entire system feels very contrived. There's actually very little way for the player to interact with the system as it is in the game right now. Now you can influence relationships by using support abilities on other characters. This is actually what Plague Doctor's Ounce of Prevention is best for now, unless you take the physician path. And in items that are either guaranteed or have a chance of increasing positive relationships are valid. Aside from that, the player can pick certain characters once they reach nodes on the road that have actions that other characters appreciate. Now, while that is 3 ways that the character can influence the relationship system, I don't believe that any of them are fun or interactive. Hoarding relationship in items, just to spam them at the end, is not intriguing gameplay. Having to pick a character choice at a node that doesn't necessarily align with what the player wants to do is not only uninteresting, but also frustrating. And as far as using utility abilities on other characters, often it is hard to tell if this is even worth doing at all, especially because the game is so damage focused as it is. And the final issue I have with the relationship system is that it inherently breaks the balance of the game. Oftentimes, even on Infernal, it is possible to get 2, 3, or even all 4 characters in a positive relationship by the end of the first or second areas. And from that point forward, the game is a cakewalk. Relationships provide extra damage, extra healing, and stress healing. So your reward as a player for successfully interacting with the relationship system is you make the game boring. Or otherwise, because for some reason there are negative act-outs with positive relationships, it makes the game frustrating. No one wants to have to use a heal on one of their characters, only to have a relationship ban you from using that ability for the entire turn. Now, how would I fix these systems? The first thing I want to talk about in terms of fixing the relationship system is how the characters gain and lose relationship, as well as how the player interacts with those characters and the relationship system itself. So the first change I would make is to make relationships much harder to cap out. Instead of a line that goes from -5 to +5, maybe the line should go from -15 to +15, with the goal of having the relationship capped out by the time you reach the mountain. To support this, and to make sure that the player doesn't feel like they're interacting with the system for no gain until the very end of the game, I would like to make relationships give gradual benefits as the bar fills, not just all the way at the end. I think that perhaps for every 5 relationship pips in one direction or another, there should be a benefit or detriment conferred onto the character in that party. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of fixing the relationship system is how the characters gain and lose relationship, as well as how the player interacts with those characters and the relationship system itself. First of all, I think it's ridiculous that you can have a full party, or close to a full party, of positive relationships even on Infernal after the first area. So the first change I would make is to make relationships much harder to cap out. Instead of a line that goes from, say, -5 to +5, maybe the line should go from -15 to +15, with the goal of having the relationship capped out by the time you reach the mountain. To support this, and to make sure that the player doesn't feel like they're interacting with this system for no gain until the very end of the game, I would like to make relationships give gradual benefits as the bar fills, not just all the way at the end. I think that, perhaps, for every 5 relationship pips in one direction or another, there should be a benefit or detriment conferred onto the character in that party. And I think also, to make it more interesting, those relationships can have different effects depending on which characters the relationship is formed with. For example, a relationship at +5 pips between Highwayman and Hellion might confer a benefit of 5 or 10% damage, whereas a relationship between Plague Doctor and Hellion might confer 10% bleed resist. But how should the characters collect those pips? I think that, primarily, relationship pips should be gained or lost on the road. Traveling on the road is already a really tedious part of Darkest Dungeon 2. It's not fun to just hold W and go forward. The fun part comes at choosing which node to go to and arriving at those nodes. I realize that having relationship pips change on the road is something that already happens, but I want to turn that up further. I want there to be more interactions between different characters, and those interactions can have side benefits as well. For example, a negative interaction could also give one stress. A positive interaction could give one speed token at the start of the next battle. Now, while this part does kill 2 birds with 1 stone, that being the method by which relationship is gained, as well as filling that dead space in between nodes, that method is entirely out of player control. So to balance that, I would like to rework the relationship in items. Instead of just having 75% chance for positive and a 25% chance for negative, or a flat positive, I think that different relationship in items should have increased or lesser effectiveness based on the types of characters using them, as well as who those characters are as people. And to do that, I want to introduce what I think is the most important change to turn relationships from a contrived mechanic to one that is interesting, and that is to utilize the already existing quirk system. Instead of just having positive and negative quirks, there can be a second system, there can be a second section that has personality traits. And these personality traits can impact how likely it is that 2 characters interact on the road, as well as how powerful the positive or negative relationship changes are between those characters. For example, a leper with the personality trait quirky might get along better with a grave robber whose personality is delinquent. A man-at-arms who is aggressive might get along better with an occultist who's sadistic, but get along worse with a highwayman that's gentle. And each character can have 1, 2, even 3 of these personality quirks. And these can be something the player can look at when they're deciding which characters to bring on their journey. As an additional way of interacting with these personality quirks, I think there should be a few nodes and items that interact or change them. An academic study might change one of the personality quirks from, say, docile to bloodthirsty. An oasis might change an aggressive quirk to a caring one. And on the same token, there can be in items that change personality quirks as well. A character reading the Necronomicon could change one of his personality quirks to something else. Similarly, a character reading a prayer book might have the opposite effect. There can even be in items that affect multiple characters at the same time. This can result in a give and take, or an opportunity cost for the player when they use that item. Do I want to increase the ability for one set of characters to have a relationship at the cost of another? Is it worth it? These are the questions that I think are compelling in a game like Darkest Dungeon. Now finally, I want to talk about the end result, the effects of this system. I've already mentioned that a full team of positive relationships can be too broken. But a big part of that is having those positive relationships early into the run, where the team is a lot less powerful. So by loading the act out portions of these relationships all the way at the end, again, like I said, ideally by the time the player gets to the mountain, not only does this save a ton of time throughout the run, of characters acting out and wasting time in battles, but it also results in the most powerful part of a relationship showing up when the player really needs it. The mountain is absolutely not a pushover, and the final bosses, especially in Act 2, are very powerful. Having relationships at the end of a run should be a reward that makes the fights easier. With that said, when the player has a full party of positive relationship characters, or conversely negative relationship characters, the act outs still can take a lot of time. It takes away agency from the player, and it feels unnecessary. I would like to keep the power of these relatively the same, so taking into account the gradual buffs on the path to achieving that relationship, the act outs can both be toned down and lessened in frequency. If they then need to be toned up slightly to have the power be neutral, then that's fine as well. This conversation is a little less about the balance of relationships and more about the design and how the player interacts with them. In addition, because you've interacted with this system for the entirety of your run, as a reward for that, I don't think there should be any negative act outs for positive relationships. This relieves a very frustrating aspect of current relationships and adds to the feeling of satisfaction that the player feels once they accomplish a relationship. Now, I haven't spoken about the consequences of a negative relationship, and I think that's important too. Positive relationships don't have the impact they would have if there were no negative option. So interacting with the relationship system poorly, or simply making trade-offs to have a relationship between two characters and not another two characters, should have its downsides. Luckily, I think having negative options is already solved by Red Hook. The gradual debuffs, say at -5 and -10, could be things as simple as negative speed, negative max HP, or conferring vulnerability tokens. On the stronger side of that, having negative relationships could make the character more likely to take an extra pip or two of stress whenever they would suffer stress damage. And when the negative relationship is finally achieved due to the player not properly interacting with the system, it should be appropriately punishing. And this is where act outs that prevent the player from using certain moves should lie. To take a leaf out of Darkest Dungeon 1's book, when afflicted with a negative relationship, characters could, for example, choose to move further away from the other character, thus disrupting the party. This particular option I think is interesting because at the moment, stacking move resist is not very interesting. There aren't very many enemies that you can counter by stacking move resist, so in this way, it could be an insurance against a floundering relationship. Now there is one more thing I would like to mention. I haven't mentioned it so far because I think this is where the Darkest Dungeon 2 relationship system currently is at its most interesting, and that is tying the stress meter to relationships. The higher the stress meter, the less likely positive relationships are to occur, and the more likely negative ones are to occur. I think this is great. This is the real reason why managing stress is really important in Darkest Dungeon 2. Having a heart attack, or in Darkest Dungeon 2's case, a meltdown, is less impactful than in Darkest Dungeon 1 because the players have significant death blow resist. So instead, tying stress directly to the relationship system is, I think, a genius way to tie it into existing systems in the game. As an afterthought, I would just like to say that this is not necessarily the only solution to the relationship problem. Game design is far from black or white. There are often far more answers than are presented, and in this case, I think that is definitely true. In fact, maybe the best answer incorporates parts of what I'm talking about and parts of a different idea entirely. With that said though, I do think that my idea is a good one, and at the very least can be used as a stepping stone toward a really compelling relationship system. But now I would like to hear what you think. Please let me know in the comments what you think is the most frustrating part of the current relationship system, and ideas that you have to fix it. Do you like my idea, or is it terrible? Let me know. Reading and replying to comments is actually my favorite part of making these videos, so I would really appreciate the engagement. But regardless, I hope all of you enjoyed the video, and have a wonderful day.